everybody. Welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, along with Dave Campbell of the Associated Press, returning to the show. And we're on my porch because one of the things I wanted to do this summer was a Porch podcast. So we just left TCO Performance Center. It's a nice day here, so we're outside talking a little bit about football. And I'm glad to have you, Dave. You are in the similar neighborhood to me, so I thought this is perfect. On your way home, stop by, do a little podcast, and then we carry on. So great to have you here on the porch.
Always good to be here. Richfield, Minnesota. What better place to broadcast from, right? My dad actually grew up half a mile from here.
Oh, really?
It's all coming full circle. Little did he know I'd be podcasting.
Little did he know. I mean, as you were being raised, I mean, who would have ever dreamed that this would be, and it is a dream to be podcasting on my porch. But
definitely.
I showed you the studio. It's nice down there. But in the summer, we'll try to do more episodes out here with some guests. So we'll call it the Porch Podcast. And for this one, I have made a list of 5 different things that I want you to rank because that was your request. I say, hey, can you come on the show? You know, whatever. And you said only if we rank stuff.
Yeah.
So I have stuff to rank. But first, before we rank, I do want to ask you about minicamp, which just wrapped up, mandatory minicamp, and what a time it was to watch them out there slowly practicing and learning things and so forth. Mm-hmm. But I do want to get your opinion on the quarterback situation, how you felt that Sam Darnold and J.J. McCarthy have looked during this thing, and where you think they stand.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's really funny how the offseason has been shaped so much by the McCarthy draft pick, you know, who they were going to pick, what they were going to have to give up to get him. But, like, now that that's been established, it could be several months before McCarthy becomes at all relevant to this team. Multiple months. It's definitely Sam Darnold to start, and for obvious reasons. There's not too many, I think, downsides in the history of the league where a rookie quarterback sat and that ended up being detrimental. Like, I don't know if you could really come up with a scenario where it was like, oh, you sat too long, you just got rusty. I mean, that's just not going to happen. It's a sharp transition from college to pro, particularly coming from a team like Michigan where they didn't ask him to do a lot. And that was certainly one of the things around his draft profile. But you know, Sam Darnold has become a little bit of a meme here or there for, you know, football fans, fantasy football players, draftniks. But it's not like he's, you know, a complete disaster. You know, there's, I think, some kind of not secret, but under the surface kind of attributes that, you know, I think he can bring to this situation. And he's going to have to because it's his job to start. It does. I think we've sort of seen that young J.J.'s got a ways to go. It's such a narrow window that's open to us in practice, so always hesitant to draw any types of conclusions. But it's pretty obvious during the portions of practice that have been open to us. You know, there's been some accuracy issues, and he's third string quarterback right now. So it'll be interesting to see how that changes as time goes on. Somebody even asked me this. Not from an official media capacity, but you could sort of see a scenario where he's the number 3 quarterback on the roster starting in early September for the regular season. And then, you know, at some point they're going to decide he's ready to start. Let's assume that's this year. He could just go from 3 to 1. Mm-hmm. There's nothing to read into that if he's not the number 2 in a given week. Nick Mullins as dressing as a number 2 for some of those early games would be the decision because that's just going to give him a better chance to win that game.
And it's hard to tell even from the reps that they're taking in minicamp who is QB 1, 2. You can't even really put together a depth chart. Today, in the final day, there were way more reps for McCarthy than Nick Mullins. Nick Mullins took hardly any when they were doing their team stuff. And when they did the final kind of drive and red zone and everybody's gathered around, that sort of thing, it was McCarthy and Darnold were the only one taking those reps, which makes you think more of QB2-ish. But again, there's no depth chart, right now. So how are we even supposed to put that together?
Yeah.
Sorry. And I think that's the hardest part is trying to give takeaways when we really responsibly shouldn't give too many takeaways, but yet the world demands to know how he looks. And so when you say he's definitely had some accuracy issues out there. It's been a discussion in the media room of how do we present this to the world? Because people ask us to be guests on their shows and things like that. And then when you go on and you say, well, the accuracy's not there yet. And then it becomes a thing when I'm not saying he'll never be accurate or that that's not even going to come along and improve day by day in training camp. All I'm saying is our first impression is that there's a lot of work to be done here. And it was really his tools were why they drafted him. But, I mean, you love the history of this team. Dante Culpepper didn't play for an entire year. When they drafted him, people went, why are you drafting him? Aren't you in Super Bowl or bust mode and so forth? And then he comes in and immediately you go, oh, well, that's why you drafted him. That's why you had a year to develop.
Yep.
And it might be the same exact thing with McCarthy. It's just we live in a world that is not tolerant of patience and wants to know the answers right now and wants to get hyped about something in June when most of the time fans would have been just tuning into the Twins. But thanks, Bailey, or whatever your name is now. I can't even do that. Right. So, I think that there's a responsible way to talk about this, and that is that they told us from day one they wanted to be patient, and they're living up to that right now.
Very true. I remember, just think about 1999 to 2024. That's like another planet. Yeah. I was just trying to flip back my mind to the Vikings then and bringing Culpepper in. I think drafted one slot later than McCarthy.
11th, right?
11, yeah. So those are all great points. And I think this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the way he's picking up the game, grasping the offense, where he'll actually be on the depth chart, when he'll start. But one interesting thing sort of gleaned from being around minicamp is from the Vikings perspective, some of their media people, he is, I think, very much seeing himself as the humble kind of, I got a lot to learn rookie. Part of this is the Vikings, they're not going to be putting him on season ticket packages. They're not going to be putting him on billboards. He's not going to be doing a lot of promo stuff right now because he's not the starting quarterback. Also, there's other reasons for that too, and he's fine with that. He seems to be much more committed and deeply desiring to learn how to play NFL quarterback well than he is about being a brand, living up to the status type of thing.
That's right. And the personality element of this and character element is one of the reasons that you draft him, because you believe in that. Like, you believe that he's not going to come in with an arrogance, and he's not going to come in and say, I'm QB1 and whatever.
Yeah.
That they connected with him, it seems like on a good level of communication when they met with him and probably told him, if we draft you, we've got this other quarterback who's been around the block and we think could actually be pretty good. And my observation from minicamp is that Sam Darnold sure looks like a starting quarterback to me. It's not quite on the same level of Kirk Cousins where he could have a minicamp practice where the ball never hit the ground, but he's completing a lot of passes, making a lot of good throws. He had one today where he threw it a little behind Justin Jefferson, and he went back and grabbed it with one hand. And you're like, well, that's going to help him, I think. And he seemed pretty pleased about that. And I also think they picked the right guy to be in that position as well, that Sam Darnold seems to be a very matter-of-fact person and does not bring, again, that attitude of like, I'm not going to help this little kid or whatever. Right. It's not like that at all. They seem to have a connection out there. But I did notice today, with every J.J. McCarthy rep almost, Josh McCown is talking to him right after. And there was one where he threw where it was an out route and the timing was wrong. Lucky Jackson was running a little out route, and the throw would have been accurate had the timing been right, but it was just off. And right after, Josh McCown is over there, and he's doing the, showing him, well, your feet are supposed to be like this, or you need to hitch a little different or whatever. That's just where we're at right now. And you talk about quarterbacks who didn't start right away. Some didn't start right away because they were really bad. Yeah. And I don't think that's going to be the case. I think it really is because they have a plan here.
Yeah.
And Kevin O'Connell has taken it personally to develop him the right way. And I think that's the treatment that you don't see a lot that a quarterback gets. So this is just different. It's almost like with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, and sometimes where his press conferences have just been different from GMs in the past, and you have to get used to that. And when we saw our first training camp practices with O'Connell, and they were so weak, like compared to the Zimmer intense practices that were super physical and everything, and we went, what is it? What is this guys even want to play football out there? And then the first week they beat the Packers and everything. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. It's just a different plan. So I think we've had to get used to that. There's just different ways of doing this, which includes the way they're handling J.J. McCarthy.
For sure. I think if Cousins was like the foreign exchange student that moved in with the O'Connell family and it became super tight and they're like friends for life, you could think of McCarthy as like almost like a firstborn son. It's going to be it's because he's starting at the ground level with him in his NFL career, and he's a former quarterback. He's got a mind for offense, and now they've hired a guy like McCown, which is it's interesting to mention that. I think one thing the Vikings will have to be careful about is too many guys in his ear. Too many cooks in the kitchen, over coaching. By all indications, they drafted the kind of player who could handle all that. And I think these are smart people telling him smart things about how to run an offense. But human nature is human nature, and both sides are going to have to be careful about that, I think, as it goes forward. We'll never be able to see all the little intricacies of what that looks like, but there are little hints out there that you can observe during a game, in press conferences, at a practice, things like that. The other thing about Sam Darnold I just think about is, what if we just don't know if he's any good?
Right.
He doesn't have a track record of carrying anyone's fantasy football team, but he's been in some pretty rotten situations, and probably just never got a really good chance to get his footing under him as a quarterback. So I think it'd be really interesting to see. It'd be a test for him, but also be a test for O'Connell and his offense and the coaching staff. I think they've got a pretty good body of work out there for how they can produce a productive NFL offense. But this will be another big test this season.
It certainly will. And I think that having two former quarterbacks that are working in lockstep with him, they could keep the message right. Like both of them understand this isn't someone who didn't play the position and has elevated themselves through coaching into a quarterback coach position, which is what they had with Chris O'Hara. Instead, these are two guys who have played in the NFL and understand the technique of throwing a football. Right. They understand combination. I mean, think about how many offenses Josh McCown played in.
Yeah.
He understands every defense, every offense, how every play is supposed to be set up, so he can be an extension of Kevin O'Connell and be responsible for a lot of the development. And it might kind of be where McCown is doing more development and O'Connell's doing more game planning with Sam Darnold or some distribution like that. That I could see it working out pretty well. But I think it was an important hire. Normally they hire a quarterback coach and you go, okay, I don't know, some guy who's trying to go up the ladder or something. This one I think is a little more unique. I want to get to our list of things that you have to rank because you have notes there as well.
I do.
But I want to give a conclusion, like a final statement of the podcast after minicamp. Because for all intents and purposes, this is it for the offseason. There's another OTA practice that is going to be open to us.
You won't be there, so it won't exist.
I won't be there. I'm actually going to be away for that one. I'll get Dane Mizutani to give the full breakdown from that one on the podcast. But the final statement I would make is that nothing changed for me from the start of any of this, from rookie camp to now, from what I thought of J.J. McCarthy. I mean, it's good to see how hard he throws the football, the athleticism. Good to talk with him and kind of see his professionalism at a young age. But I expected all of that.
Yeah.
And I expected some rocky moments as well during this, learning period. It didn't look like, wow, this guy's Peyton Manning out there or something right away. But it also doesn't look like he's throwing the ball into the stands or anything, or that he's lost out there. It looks like there's going to have to just be an improvement in consistency, touch on the football, all the things that we knew. And so I haven't changed at all. I think this was, for them, a quarterback that we're going to have to be patient with a little bit, but still exactly the type of quarterback that they were looking for to pair with Kevin O'Connell and go forward in the future. The person who's changed my mind a little is Darnold. I just think he's looked so excellent out there on a day-to-day basis that I'm buying that a little bit more, as much as one can at this moment. But if we, don't have to couch everything, I just think it's looked quite good from him.
Sure. And I would agree with that. Nothing really seems to have changed, nor really should it, unless there's a major injury or something. But Jefferson is now signed, but that was expected. It was finally determined for the world who their next quarterback was going to be on that Thursday night in late April. Now they're sort of set, and now we get to kind of just watch the ups and downs, see what they're made of, see what these players are made of, and that's, I guess, the fun part for everybody.
It will be. This is going to be the most interesting training camp. I remember you and I had a discussion last year.
We ranked it
about
we
the
ranked.
most. I think it was was it training camps or just off season?
I think it was off season intrigue was the actual category.
Yes, we ranked.
It was probably
intrigue.
minicamp time.
This would be number one though, right? For a long time. At
for
least
a long
definitely
time.
in my time.
You were trying to sell me on last year, and I was cool on that one, and I came
in
around. In
hindsight, it looks worse.
I came around, but
worse.
this year, I'm much more interested. Like about the different parts. I mean, and even you go further down the roster. I mean, all the new defensive players they're plugging in, and mixing and matching and moving around. And Aaron Jones in the backfield, what's he going to do for this running game that's been pretty poor for the first 2 seasons under O'Connell's staff?
I was thinking about how if there was no J.J. McCarthy, this one would still
get
a
ranking.
Still
be up there.
I mean, Aaron Jones is here, which
right.
is going to be one of my questions. But like Aaron Jones, the guy who has absolutely slaughtered this team, he averages 5.8 yards per carry against the Vikings in his career.
Yeah.
That's like Barry Sanders. Like every time he goes out there against the Vikings, and they just have him on the team, and we're like, oh yeah, well, Aaron Jones, but quarterback. Jonathan Bernard talked to him, yesterday. Really interesting guy.
Yeah,
that's a $20 million pass rusher that we're all kind of being like, oh yeah, well they got him.
What's his first name again? Jonathan.
Yeah. Is that it is kind of funny because those would be the huge players in camp if not for the quarterback situation. Right. So that's a good transition into the first ranking. I have 5.
Sure.
The first ranking I wanted you to do was the 5 most off-season hyped quarterbacks of your career covering the Vikings, which began what year?
For all intents and purposes, 2001. So since
what's great about this is that I always get to look at you and be like,
wow.
You thought you were. I know. I feel like I'm a little on the getting on the older side.
Right.
But 2001.
Well, I'm gonna add a little bit of curveball to the way you introduced that, just because I was thinking more Vikings history about this particular category. So I'm gonna stretch a little bit further beyond.
Yeah, that's how I wanted you. Yeah,
I started covering the team.
Right.
To when I was even following the team.
Sure, that works.
Kid. So I'm gonna start with number 5, and we'll work way up to 1. I'm gonna go with Warren Moon.
Oh yeah,
that's the one outlier I had professional career. 1994.
That was such a monumental thing.
He was a big name. He put up huge numbers with the Oilers, and here was a team. The first 2 seasons under Danny Green had a Tony Dungy led, very excellent, dominant defense. Could run the ball with Robert Smith or Terry Allen, depending on who was injured and who was not. But they really couldn't throw the ball, and they had Chris Carter, and here comes Warren Moon. And it didn't quite go as awesome as maybe fans thought, or people national people who follow the league nationally, because he's a big name. 94, their offense was actually the worst it was in the 3 years that they were here, or at least it started pretty slowly. They had I think it kind of caught fire down the stretch as Jake Reed kind of emerged as a really solid number 2. But I remember I believe the first game that Warren Moon ever played, I think they lost to the Packers 10-6. I was like, oof. So it took a little while.
Can you imagine what that would have been like now? There'd be an entire week of is this the worst trade ever?
Yeah,
is he a bust?
Exactly.
And so forth.
But there was, for 1994 standpoint, that was kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
Him coming in. Number 4, I went with J.J. McCarthy, just because, for all the reasons we just laid out. Ooh, quarterback over there. Even if this guy,
but highest drafted quarterback in franchise history.
Correct. And also kind of at this point where this, not just the draft pick height, but this really major turning point in the franchise's trajectory from the Cousins era to this new one. It's the internet age, so that plays into these rankings, fair or not, right? Mm-hmm. There's constant speculation. Even just leading up to the draft with so many prospects, how was it going to shake out? Who are they going to trade up and get? And anyway, a lot of hype because we're talking this much at this length about someone who's going in as clearly as a backup, at least to start.
And also, he will define Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell's time here, which always feels unfair that one draft pick will do that, but that's life in the NFL. And so knowing all the potential options, the trade options, the different opinions on each quarterback, each one had something to like, something you were worried about, how's draft night going to play out, how Kwesi Adofo-Mensah was going to handle all that, and then landing him without having to trade up other than one spot. The amount of just attention even to that draft adds to it because 25 years ago, you're talking about the draft was read in the morning paper who they picked.
Right.
And now it's so much more than that.
Definitely. So I consider ranking Christian Ponder. He was drafted in a similar range at the same type of point when they needed a quarterback and they were transferring or transitioning from Favre to the next guy. But I don't think he came with quite the same cachet. He didn't win a national championship, even though he played at a program like Florida State. And they also brought in Don McNabb.
Oh, right.
At this, as sort of the presumptive starter that offseason.
But they reached on him according to everyone.
Yes.
Which I think now we would not have looked at it like that maybe as
Probably
much.
Not.
Because drafting a quarterback and having that guy work, and we all know that we can't predict quarterbacks now.
Right.
But when Mike Mayock went on TV and said they reached, that became the thing from day one. I mean, I wasn't even here, and I remember that. Wow, I can't believe how much they reached on Christian Ponder was the entire narrative. That took away from the excitement level, whereas J.J. McCarthy comes in with the national championship.
Right.
And no one thought they reached. They thought, well, actually I got a deal because a lot of people thought they were going to have to trade up. So it's a different narrative from him. So that's not your number 3 then.
It's not. He is not ranked. I just thought it was worth part of the discussion. I think the Christian Ponder was still in the water, and I think that even caused a lot of people to even think about McCarthy as, are they going to reach on this guy because he's just from a big-name school and he's still kind of the number 4 consensus prospect down from the top 3. But anyway, number 3, Kirk Cousins.
Super Bowl or bust.
Super Bowl or bust. First fully guaranteed deal. Established starter. Came into a team with huge expectations, having just, made the NFC Championship game the season before. I think that kind of stands for itself. So number 2 is Teddy Bridgewater.
Okay, that's above Kirk.
I put him above Kirk. I think there was just a lot of hype around the whole team that offseason for the Vikings in 2018. They were starting to sign these guys to extensions like Diggs and Danielle Hunter. And it was more about fitting a piece into the team. I know there was a lot of attention around him. How was he going to look? How was he going to fit with the offense? All these things. But that team just had a lot of stars.
Right.
And I think even though maybe some people were talking themselves into him being better than he, might have been, I think, generally people, you kind of knew what you were getting.
Yeah.
I think most offseason quarterback hype especially comes from the unknown.
Yep.
And a lot of times with a rookie, but sometimes it can be a newcomer. But
no, I agree with that narrative. With the idea that a rookie has more intrigue just based on the fact that you don't know anything about him. Yeah. With Kirk, the only argument I would just have is since they went to the NFC Championship, he was supposed to be the reason they went to the next level.
Right.
And that did not come to fruition right away or ever. But it was the whole logic of it made sense at the time.
Yeah, it did.
Which was, all right, well, they went this far with Case Keenum, but, now they've got this probably 2-year window to go even farther. And I remember even Zimmer, who clearly was not the most thrilled guy in the world the day that they announced him, saying something like, if the defense fails, we need someone to pass us through it, which was clearly a shot at Case Keenum that he didn't think that he could do that.
I know.
But
careful what you wish for, Zim.
Yeah, I know. There was. And Kirk couldn't do it either. But there was NFL Network and Peter King and every major writer reporter was showing up at the training camp every single day at that camp. So that did have a ton of hype. I think as far as me covering the team until now, that would be number 1. But okay, Bridgewater number 2.
The reason I had Bridgewater up there's, I think, a lot like McCarthy centered around the draft. Going in, the Ponder era was already effectively over, and there was another decent crop of quarterbacks. Now, none of them turned out to be, but he had the Blake Bortles and Johnny Manziel, and
the later ones turned out to be better. Jimmy Garoppolo, Derek
Carr, right? Yeah. Exactly. But they had gone through, they got their Anthony Barr, and they'd gone through the draft, and all of a sudden they move back up to 32, and he officially becomes a first-round pick. There were, in the combine and pro day season, there was a lot of a buzz around Teddy Bridgewater as being more of a top 10 pick, and there were certain things. His pro day wasn't very good, I think, if I remember correctly, and the whole thing about wearing the glove.
Yep.
And you know how those things work. It's just ebbs and flows, and narratives are narratives. But I do think there was, this sense of excitement around him that only built once they saw his personality, and realizing it was also a team on the rise. It's going into the second season of Zimmer. They had some good young defensive players, and that's the offseason when the phrase "How's Teddy looking?"
Oh yes,
was invented.
Yeah.
And so here we are, 9 years later. Whatever quarterback people want to know about in practice, I think it was all fueled right then and there that offseason.
And then
so
it
that's
returned.
Part of the reason I ranked him so high.
It returned after he came back from his injury.
Yes.
It was How's Teddy looking came back. Number one is so easy.
Yeah. Brett Favre.
And it's almost no explanation. It's
if you had to boil it down to two words, chicken suit. The day he came.
Do I not know this story?
Well, you should. Your viewers and listeners should too. They sign him. You remember it's the circus, the day that Childress picks him up from the airport, and he's coming after he had said no, a couple weeks earlier, and got a few extra coins out of the Wilfs. Childress picks him up, and everyone knows he's in this it's almost this OJ kind of procession to Winter Park.
I've heard of the helicopters.
The helicopters.
Yeah.
And it's hard to describe, but Winter Park was located on this frontage road on 494 and near 169, and we had this workspace in an office building across the street. And there was sort of this curve. It's Washington Avenue or Washington Road or something that turns into Viking Drive, and anytime there's a big story, there was where the satellite trucks would always set up, and it was a big controversial day in Vikings sort of season if you saw satellite trucks on this berm there. But that day, it wasn't just the satellite trucks; it was just fans coming out of the woodwork, lining up, and there's hardly any space between the road and the chain link fence that separates from the highway. But there's just hundreds of fans trying to catch a glimpse, including one guy dressed up in a chicken suit, who I think was advertising for Treasure Island Casino. I never got the full story on that, but all you have to do is say chicken suit, and I think of that day.
Okay, I didn't know that. I didn't know that someone in a chicken suit was there.
Yeah,
I am also trying to envision, having covered many practices there before they changed facilities, how people could fit where you're describing, because there is no area for fans to gather.
It's not
around that place. In fact, I was always very scared of the road where we would have to run across. And when we had an overflow media area during the NFC Championship, they put us over in ITT Tech, which was around the corner. We had to walk down by that fence and then slide down the hill in order to go to the locker room. So I can imagine that. Yeah, I mean, there are very few of these that would have captured the entire minds of the nation.
Right.
And even to some extent, J.J. McCarthy, when there's 4 other quarterbacks drafted ahead of them, then it's, Drake May, how's he looking? Caleb Williams is by far the number 1 hyped quarterback.
Oh, yeah.
It's not even close.
Yeah.
In fact, that's good for McCarthy. He could go under the radar, and, if he's not playing, he's a 5th quarterback. But with Brett Favre, I mean, whether you were in Buffalo, New York, or Antarctica, you knew Brett Favre was joining the Minnesota Vikings, which was just insane for him to be joining the arch rival and everything else, knowing that they would play each other and all that, and wondering what's he got left, because with the Jets he had started off so hot and then completely come apart at the end.
Yep.
And I don't remember my expectations being all that high, but just thinking this is crazy that this is actually happening.
Especially living around here and knowing the history of the two teams and how just how hated he was by the Vikings and Vikings fans, even though there's maybe a sort of a healthy respect there for his ability and his sort of competitiveness. But I think that was also before the NBA became before the super team type stuff, and a lot of the player movement in the NBA is not necessarily from rival to rival, but to me, I think that wasn't even going on in any league back then. Like this kind of huge superstar going, to another team, sort of surprisingly, like. He didn't he didn't become a free agent. It's like, where he's going to go next. It was like, he's going to retire, and all of a sudden he wants to come back, and it was this huge mess. So all that, soap opera behind it really made it the clear slam dunk number 1 pick.
I mean, at that point, there were a handful of examples throughout history, but there weren't that many quarterbacks who had changed teams. And
Joe Montana.
But not going to their rival, like going to someone in the division.
Yeah.
Montana goes to the Chiefs, so that's interesting because they were a good team. But maybe Reggie White, Deion Sanders and Charles Haley going to Dallas Cowboys.
There's a few, but a defensive player is a different animal than a quarterback.
It would be like Steve Young going to play for the Cowboys.
Yeah,
I mean it was that intense. Speaking of which, talk about more transitions.
Yes.
Excuse me. Aaron Jones is a Minnesota Viking, which, again, very weird because he has demolished them. So I wanted you to tell me where Aaron Jones ranks in terms of Packers to Vikings. Now, once again, Favre is your number 1, I'm sure.
Yes.
Packers to Vikings. So
we don't
have to throw that one out there. So we'll start at 1. Actually, take me the other way until we get to Aaron Jones, because Favre is clearly 1. So who's number 2? Who is before Aaron Jones on your list of Packers who became Vikings?
Well, I'd love to see how the season plays out to fairly rank it. I mean, let's say he has hamstring trouble in October.
Well, we can't do that, Dave. We got to do it right now. We can only do it right now.
Okay.
We can't wait for him to
play.
We're
I'm going to give.
Assume he plays well.
That's fair. I'm going to give Ryan Longwell still the number 2 slot.
Really?
It was a vital position. And, he's still, I think you could make the argument, as the best kicker in Vikings history, considering how he never, there isn't any terrible, misses at the end of games where they just, kind of tarnished a good season or a good game. He was so clutch.
Somebody in Vikings history?
A few. There's a few other.
Okay.
The names are escaping me right now. I have to look it up on Football
Maybe
Reference.
Someone can leave it in the comments.
But he was so consistent.
The more that YouTube shares it, so I'm hoping.
Comments.
I'm hoping people take that seriously.
Comments.
Get a lot of comments on that.
But he also, despite he was getting older, but he still could go. He said his career long, no pun intended, Longwell. A couple of times, if I remember, he had a 53-yarder to beat the Giants in 2008 to clinch the division. So he was, it was a little under the radar because he's a kicker, and there's so much else that went on with the team from the period of 2006 to 2011 when he was here. But that's a 6-year run of really, really accurate kicking. So I'm still going to put him in number 2.
If they don't have the 12 men in the huddle and Favre just throws an incompletion, he makes it.
He makes it.
He
sends them to the Super Bowl.
Confident,
yeah, exactly.
He was a great kicker.
Yeah.
It's not hot though. It's not a hot opinion. Kicker who was real good.
Yeah.
Revenge.
It's not really hot.
Okay.
But I'm going to slide Aaron Jones at number 3. I mean, you reeled off the stats earlier in the show. not just a Vikings killer, but like, a premier type of running back who was sort of like all of a sudden he's available. And then like, because there's still talk the Packers were going to, they said publicly at least they wanted to bring him back. And then, of course, money always talks in the end. But I know he's, for a running back, old, but the way he produced down the stretch last season after he came back from injury for the Packers was like, whoa. It was, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but it was like 4 or 5 straight 100-yard games into the playoffs, including the playoffs. So I think he's got a lot of juice left. And
it played no small part in Jordan Love's success. I mean, it was huge.
Right.
To have him, he caught passes, he pass protected, he set up all the play actions by running so effectively. He's one of those guys that I don't know how you feel about this, but there are just some players who kind of walk in the room and you're like, that guy's a superstar, man. There's like a different gear to certain players where there's really good players who have certain sort of, they're good and we all appreciate that. And then there's the 1%. And through his career, he is in the 1%. He's in the top 5 for yards per carry ever.
That's amazing.
Isn't that crazy?
That's quite a stat.
And he's just shows up here all of a sudden.
Yeah, right. And the Packers loved him. Like, obviously, management didn't love him enough to give him a certain number as a running back at his age. But his teammates and coaches just loved that guy. He was like a no-nonsense kind of low-maintenance, no drama, play hard, and obviously produced. And he can catch the ball out of the backfield too. So that's going to be another really intriguing player to watch for the Vikings. I think there's so many unknowns. I think there's a pretty wild fluctuation for how the season could go.
Okay, Dayton Jones, Shannon Sullivan.
Those are great names, by the way. Dayton Jones actually never even appeared in a game of the Vikings.
Well, I took the liberty of with him,
we did. I took the liberty of doing some important research before this category came up. 63 players in history of the NFL, which is 64 years since the Vikings became a team, have played for both franchises. 39 of those were with the Packers before the Vikings. Not all of those went directly, but sometimes
it feels like there's been a ton.
It feels like there's been hundreds, but so boils down to 39. It made that sort of jump, but that's still not an insignificant number. And the percentage of those who are high-profile players is, I think, quite stunning. So number 3, hesitant to put him on the list for how things unraveled for him after his career ended, but Darren Sharper. He had a very productive career with the Vikings after having a productive career with the Packers. The game that jumps out to me was in 2005. They're at the Meadowlands, and they intercept Eli Manning, I believe, 4 times, and he had, I think, 2 of them. One of them was returned for a touchdown, and that, they didn't end up making the playoffs that year, but it was sort of it gave them this late burst where they almost did, and Mike Tice got fired. But
I remember that game, yeah. I mean, that was one of those where is Eli a bust? Because it was not really established that Eli was great yet.
Second year,
yep,
right?
And he, threw all those picks. With Darren Sharper, it's very hard. I remember this came up a couple years ago. Somebody said, well, he should still be in the Hall of Fame or whatever, which I'm totally fine with not.
Yeah.
It's kind of like how I feel about Barry Bonds. I don't need him there. It's fine
Sure.
if you want to throw the statistics and make your arguments. I'm also not going to cry any tears for the guy not being in the Hall of Fame. Heck of a ball player. He really was.
You can just leave it at that.
The other stuff, pretty gnarly.
Great nose for the ball.
Was a really good player. Yeah. So let's move on to the next
we'll move
one.
on. Number 4, maybe a little controversial considering he only lasted 1 season, but Zadarius Smith.
He was fantastic.
He was. And they got him for pennies on the dollar, basically.
Strange cat.
Didn't really like the attention. I think it seemed to boil down to that for me. I've gone over to Green Bay a handful of times to help cover big games over there, and I remember covering the 2019 season playoff game where they played the Seahawks, and it was a great game. And going to the Packers locker room and realizing that that was his first year with the Packers. He did every single interview sort of in a tandem with Preston Smith.
That's right.
And because he just didn't want the attention or whatever. I never got the full explanation. Thought it was a little strange, but sort of that same perspective or attitude carried over to Minnesota. We very rarely got him to talk about how he was playing or how he was fitting in. And when he did talk, it was very much like he was smiling, but he was like, I can't wait to get this over with.
He did an interview in minicamp, I think, or just at the start of training camp, where he had said something that maybe didn't make the Packers look the best, and it made the rounds, and we never heard from him again.
Yeah.
And I think it speaks to exactly what you're saying. He was just not fond of that, but also maybe not trusting of that. And if I remember, it wasn't even one of us, but they don't know the difference sometimes between whoever, like he had just gotten here. He doesn't know the different reporters. So he had made some comment that blew up in Green Bay and people got upset with him or whatever. And we just didn't hear from him. But he was another guy similar to Aaron Jones where the health is going to be a thing, and that became a thing. But when he was playing well at the beginning of the season, there are few players. Everson was like this, where every down was something. He was pressure, a tackle for loss, just pushing the pocket or getting a sack. It was like every play, whether it was run or pass, it didn't matter. We don't really think of that much because that defense was so bad. And sometimes I can't believe how bad it was with the players that they had.
Right.
With Hunter and Zadarius Smith there and Patrick Peterson and Eric Hendricks. I've never seen someone drop the bag so badly schematically as Ed Donatel did. But Zadarius Smith belongs on the list even though it was 1 year. I agree with that. And
then my number 5 pick, I went way outside the box in this. Jan Stenerud.
Oh, wow. The Kansas City kicker.
Yeah. It's funny little Vikings full circle moment. He was the kicker for the Chiefs when they beat them in the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl IV, the Vikings' first Super Bowl.
Has Patrick Royce ever told you a story about that?
I'm sure he has.
Okay,
I can only remember so many of Pat's.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because Patrick said that when they arrived for that Super Bowl and they were watching warm-ups, and when the other team's kicker was making 50-yard kicks in warm-ups, they went, we're screwed. This team's going to beat us. And they were.
Yeah, that's funny. That's a great story. So Jan had a little Packers stint after the Chiefs, which he was with for decades. But then he wrapped it up with the Vikings, and in 1984, he led the league in field goal percentage.
Oh.
Not a very good Vikings team, but, hey, if I got Longwell on the list, let's
kickers on the list, I feel like is a violation of some kind.
Maybe.
But not Greg Jennings.
No. Obviously,
That's fair.
He came to mind right away, but like, oh, that team could not pass the ball, and he, I know he was working with a lot of shuffling and some, poor to average at best quarterbacking, and offensive strategy back then was, not what it is now. But yeah, there wasn't enough on the field or on his stat line now is preserved forever from Jennings in Minnesota for me to put him on that top 5.
Okay, congratulations to Jan Stenerud on his number 5 spot as opposed to Greg Jennings. But yeah, it is a fascinating effect. And I think part of it is anytime – I remember Anthony Zettel by any chance?
Yeah, I do.
Where he had one crazy good game against the Vikings.
Yes.
And then they signed him, and he was just horrendous by the time he got here. But
he was done in
training
camp.
He had that one big game.
2.5
and they were
sacks,
like, okay, let's sign him. I feel like there's that same thing within the division where it's like we see these guys all the time.
Yeah.
And so we're so familiar with them. We'll just bring them over because we know that they're good players. All right, here's the next question for you. This is more of a one-word answer rather than a ranking, which is if Sam Darnold plays, what date will ESPN have a headline for a debate show should the Vikings play McCarthy?
October 8th.
Okay, why October 8th?
Well, it's a Tuesday. I looked this up. It's during their bye week.
Okay.
They'll be 5 games in at that point.
So maybe 2 and 3 or 1 and 4.
Coming
off,
off,
would have to happen.
Yeah, and that the start. Yeah, the start is against some tough defenses. That you've got San Francisco and Houston and Green Bay in September, and then Then the Jets in London. The Jets can play some defense. At least we think they have the last couple of years under Robert Saleh.
We'll see if Rodgers has maybe decided to go live in a tree or something by then. Find out.
Yeah, that'll be fascinating. So that seems to me the time when, he may have had Darnold may have had a couple of tougher games against some tougher competition, and the people will need something to talk about, and that's my best guess.
I have targeted a very similar time. Yeah,
Sure.
When the schedule came out, my first thought in looking at it was that the bye week is set up just perfectly.
It is. It really is.
And, yeah, they're playing Detroit coming out,
Sure.
which will be a difficult game.
But it's at home.
They also played Jaron Hall on a Monday Night Football or whatever, Sunday Night Football against the Packers with the playoffs on the line last year. So they're not afraid of the division opponent. But I could be wrong about the defense. Defenses change from year to year.
Definitely.
The Lions don't terrify me defensively.
No.
And if Nick Mullins could put up 400 yards on them last year, again, I know they've changed. I know they got DJ Reader and Carlton Davis and so forth, but they're not a complex defense where you think, oh, if I put my quarterback in there. And I think that's why Kirk ate them up, is because they were pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
And so he could throw to the right spots.
You didn't have to ad-lib as much against them.
He didn't have to figure a lot out after the snap.
Yep.
I felt like with that Detroit defense, where when Kirk played against Belichick that one time in 18, he was just baffled, which most people are, and as we see it with Flores as well. But if you're putting a rookie quarterback in, that's probably a time to do it. I like that.
Makes sense to me.
I don't even think there's a huge debate over that.
No.
It's really just that's where they'll first start talking about it, and maybe the team is talking about it, unless Sam Darnold is 4-1. And if he's 4-1, then nobody will be talking about J.J. McCarthy. But that's a pretty tough sell, considering who you have leading up to that bye week.
Yeah, and so this is how it'll go. It'll be the headline, the speculative talking head fodder will be out there. Should they play McCarthy? And then by the end of the week, my son will come home it'll be fourth grade then, and be like, "Dad, I heard McCarthy's going to start on Sunday." Son, it's not actually true yet.
Well, we'll see if it is.
But maybe it will be.
Maybe it will be. But, are you suggesting that the debate topics are not always reflective of reality?
Yeah, it's scary times for our youth out there now that they know how to Google search.
The media literacy needs to be something that is probably – it's actually more important than science, history.
Honestly.
No, that might be exaggerating, but
maybe
it is important.
Yeah.
It is important because there's a lot of BS out there. Not anything involving Justin Jefferson's contract.
No, not at all.
Just all straight across the board. Just all facts.
All.
Okay, two more, and we'll make them a little bit quicker. But all-time wide receivers, 1 through 5. How do you rank them? And really, this is a question directed at: do you think Justin Jefferson is already on this list?
Oh, we're talking Vikings or NFL?
Vikings. That was the next.
He's already on the list, and he's actually number 1.
No.
I'm serious.
You think Justin Jefferson right now is the all-time Vikings receiver?
I'm serious. I believe that.
Over 84.
I had to pause. It wasn't a slam dunk knee jerk. But Randy only was here for 7 seasons, and a couple of those were a little iffy for injury-wise or
running over someone's
car. Yeah, off the field stuff. So I think, I guess we're projecting out a little bit, but I've seen enough in 4 seasons to actually put him number 1 on the list already.
Okay, now that's you waited 49 minutes into this podcast to give.
Congrats
the
if you're still watching at this
take.
point.
They are. The folks love it.
And I'm not like that would be a typical take from someone younger than me. Like it's like the LeBron versus MJ, because I'm the MJ generation. But here's the old guy taking the younger pick.
So the way I would think of it is that we can certainly project out that if he continues to do this, he will put up bigger numbers than Randy Moss did. The 15-1 season, the historic
amazing
opening to his career, was iconic within that offense.
Yeah.
And they won a lot right away with him. There's the fact that I think that a lot of people became Minnesota Vikings fans or cared about the Minnesota Vikings because of Randy Moss. The way that he played was so notable. I mean, the stylistically, it's sort of like Thurman Thomas might have been a better running back than Barry Sanders, but
you'd rather watch
Barry Sanders,
yeah.
right?
Great point.
There's some of that, but if you start to factor it in of the consistency element and the personality element, where and Randy Moss's upbringing is so insanely different than Justin Jefferson's that we have to give him grace on that.
We do.
But it matters that the play when I want to play and the different things that happened along the way versus you have this just pristine character with Justin Jefferson, even the way that he handled this negotiation. He didn't give any fuel to any fire with nonsense that was going on around it, and he's just so impressive that way. I think maybe there's also it could be a product of how football is played now.
Yep.
Where Jefferson, if he doesn't have catches for a quarter, you're like, what happened? Where did he go? What the coaches did something wrong. Where with Moss, there was this 3 catches for 150 yards kind of. Jefferson is more of a force. It's more of a beating drum that just never stops, as opposed to a circus act that when it's spectacular, it's so spectacular.
Yeah,
but you feel
that's
like
a good way to put
if you were an opponent, you could survive it if he made a couple of catches.
Yeah.
Whereas Jefferson, there's no surviving it. It's just like it's going to keep beating you over the head under all circumstances. So it's a little bit of a different way of playing the game.
Here you thought it was a hot take, but you just spent 15 minutes supporting my argument.
Well, I'm trying to work with you here because the comment section, although the comment section, could be pretty exciting after that one. Okay, well then is Moss number 2.
Oh, yeah. Like the 1-2, that's not even really – and that's considering how many other really good receivers there are in this Vikings history. But there's I hate to say steep drop-off because that makes the number 3 person look like chopped liver. But it's really a 1-2 kind of thing just based on – all those things you laid out about their impact and, the way they hooked people and kids on Vikings football.
Right.
But number 3, Chris Carter. I mean, consistency, just amazing in and of itself. But the circus catches, Randy had a circus element to him from the way he just blow by a defender and just rack up these gaudy statistics in particular games. But Chris Carter, the catches, the sideline catches, he basically invented that as
the toe tap
as a skill or as a sort of a life hack for football players.
It's almost a crime that Randy Moss's highlights every day get circulated on the internet and never Chris Carter's.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because a lot of them were 10-yard catches.
Right, but they were just astounding.
They were on 3rd and 8 and in a key moment in the game.
Would you say the best hands of all time? I mean, as far as modern receiver, I think he was. I think he had the best hands I've ever seen.
It's hard to come up with anything different. Like, at least he'd be tied with whoever. So
the 4th is hard.
4th is really hard, as is 5, because, I think there's
Jake Reed, Diggs, Anthony Carter,
and Thielen.
Adam Thielen.
I think there's 4 guys realistically in competition for those final 2 spots.
You could throw Sammy White in there if you want to.
Could throw Sammy, yeah. It's hard sometimes, in Rashad, the eras becomes a really tricky thing. But even though they're in this era of, competent to dominant passing, I still think the more recent Vikings as receivers were, I think, just a little bit more star kind of impact players than the ones in the Bud Grant era. Mm-hmm. So nonetheless, for number 4, I went with Anthony Carter.
I like it.
There's just the 1987 playoffs alone, catching 224 yards, I believe is the number in to beat the 49ers and go to
that game. One of the great receiver games ever.
Yeah, and here's this kind of upstart team in a strike year. That goes on the road and beats a decent New Orleans team. Okay, fine, and then they go on the road and beat the 49ers, and then go to the NFC Championship game. That was, and you could trace a lot of that back to him. And then he was still a really solid kind of 1-2 with Chris Carter for a little while. So not a super long Vikings career, but a really really good receiver with some ups and downs at the quarterback spot, from Tommy Kramer to Wade Wilson, little Rich Gannon mixed in there, Sean Salisbury.
He was banged up a lot.
He had injuries. But I think he was kind of an often overlooked star performer in Vikings history.
No debate there. Now, number 5, that's a real debate.
Yeah,
Jake Reed was wonderful.
Jake Reed was great, and it's almost he's unfairly punished for being like the number 3 for a couple of years behind Boston Carter. I think I'd still go with Thielen as my number 5. Maybe some of that is the way that he's sort of self-made. I mean, Jake Reed is an underdog too. Comes from Grambling and things. So a really kind of heartwarming story too. And he also had like eye issues. Like if you remember that, he was actually blind in one eye and had to like train himself how to catch and overcome that, which is amazing in and of itself. But Thielen, even setting aside the underdog story, he was with the team for 10 years, right? And
2013, right?
Rookie practice squad through 22.
22, yeah.
So 10 years, and even though toward the end he had injuries, and he was a little less effective, when Jefferson and Diggs were in the picture, he was a little bit more the number 2, but the consistency was amazing in the third down, red zone, and he did it for a long time.
And he set records at times. Like 4-game stretch or whatever else. He had the most yards and different things like that throughout his career. And the unforgettable catch against New Orleans in the Minneapolis Miracle game doesn't get its shine, but when he went up over Marshawn Lattimore, and I think injured his back falling down, but he had
great point.
So many just breathtaking catches that you have no idea how the ball got to him. And his 2017 season is one of the most insane kind of breakout, improbable breakout seasons maybe in NFL history, because he was good in 16.
Yeah.
And you thought like, okay, this looks
Strong
like
start.
A guy who could play in the league.
Yeah.
But then in 17, everything that was thrown his way from Case Keenum, he was making catches on, and part of the duo, but it was 1A, 1B more than 1-2.
Actually,
we always, because of fantasy, want to make it 1-2, but it was a real duo, and just one of those defining players. I think of the Minnesota Vikings, where he won't make a Hall of Fame, but he's a guarantee Ring of Honor.
Yeah.
Like, there's not even a question about it.
Right.
I agree with you there. The way Diggs left probably knocks him off a little bit. Has certainly the numbers, the Minneapolis Miracle, and so forth, but it's just hard to put him there when the skip practice, the true tall rumors, it just got ugly kind of at the end there, which I think knocks him down a peg versus, Thielen. Everybody knew it was kind of over, and it was over the way that it normally goes in the NFL.
Right.
Okay, last thing. This has been a very fun first Porch podcast, and we've avoided too much plane noise, which is native to
prime time in the afternoon.
Yeah, that's native to where I live here. But I want you to rank these items in most likely to least likely. Sam Darnold makes the playoffs and people talk about keeping him. Darnold plays half the season and gets benched, but McCarthy is not great. He gets benched and McCarthy is great, or McCarthy wins the job out of camp. So most likely to least likely, 1, 2, 3, 4. Number 1 is the most likely. Number 4 is the least likely.
I'm gonna start with least. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
If that's okay.
That's perfectly
And I think
fine.
that's the easiest choice for least likely. McCarthy wins the job out of camp.
I agree.
There's just no reason to give him the job, even if for week 1. They're just
unless he's
really
spectacular in training camp.
Sure. I guess there's always our friend Derek Wetmore always used to say there's a non-zero chance.
Yes.
And so that's certainly true, but they're not in this position where anyone would need to be desperate. I guess if Sam Darnold broke a collarbone in practice,
that can happen.
It could happen. Then maybe it's a different story.
I think knees are the thing we're always focused on here, and so forth. So
that'd still be my number 4. I think most people would probably peg the same. The 2 and 3, I waffled a little bit when I thought about this, and I ended up going with Darnold starts, yields to McCarthy, who is really good.
That's 3.
That's actually my number 3.
Okay.
because it's just gonna be an uphill climb for a rookie in a tough division. Even with Justin Jefferson, even with the smarts I think he's bringing to the position, it's a complicated offense, and I think being good is much different from being okay. Mm-hmm. I think he could well be okay, but I don't see a C.J. Stroud type of performance ahead. But that's why we watch the games.
It's
Who
hard.
knows?
It's very hard. What C.J. Stroud did is a pretty big outlier to what even good quarterbacks have done in their first time starting it. And even Jordan Love had his first 8 games was pretty rocky.
It was.
If it looks like that,
so if McCarthy only gets 8 games or 10 games, then much less of a chance of being really good.
So then I assume.
So my number 2 was they eke into the playoffs with Darnold, and
okay.
I hesitate to say people are really going to be talking about keeping him, but that would sort of be part and parcel with that type of result. Everyone needs something to talk about, so that would be something you would talk about if they made the playoffs with him.
So that's the second most likely, is that he makes the playoffs and plays pretty well.
Yeah, I just don't. We talk about all these things that are unknowns, from Aaron Jones to Jonathan Grenard, and I think most skeptical Vikings fans or just people around the league have sort of just assumed they're the 4th best team in the division.
Yeah,
you could certainly make that strong argument. You could certainly make an argument that the futures for the next couple of years of the other 3 division teams are brighter than the Vikings. But we just also have a really small sample size on this coaching staff. Some of these new players who haven't even played a game for the team. Who knows? That's why this league is what it is. You just don't know. So you really couldn't say that it's far-fetched for that to happen.
When we go look at the standings and what we thought projecting them versus how they end up, it's never like that.
Never like that.
And with Darnold, the more that we've watched him in these practices, the more I think that this result is possible, except for the second part, if people are talking about keeping him, which I know is vague. People talk about keeping him. Right. But the bar is very high. If they go 9-8 and he throws 23 touchdowns, 14 picks, no one's talking about keeping him.
No.
If he goes 33 touchdowns, 8 picks or so, but how likely is that?
Yeah, it's not that likely.
Not that likely.
But
I might have.
I guess
yeah, this one's a hard one.
It's a hard one. From a general standpoint, though, if he played well enough and the team was overall good enough, you could see people saying, "Okay, let's give this another year."
Franchise tag him or something.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But for McCarthy, one more year to sit and watch. What's the harm of that? He's 21 years old.
Right.
If you just look at what the Packers did, I mean, no harm in that. So anyway.
So then number 1 is that Darnold plays half the season, gets benched, and McCarthy struggles.
Yeah, I think it feels just knowing the learning curve for this position, knowing that even though they're playing a third place schedule, and we don't know how teams go from year to year. I think you could still safely say it's a tough schedule.
It is.
And there's some pockets where they could probably really make some hay and get some momentum. But
they're all on the road. Have you noticed that? It goes from very hard to then on the road
3
forever,
straight road games.
Then back to hard.
Yeah.
It's a hard schedule.
Yeah.
I see why Vegas has them at 6.5.
Right.
It's just not an easy schedule. And it's not easy for anybody to come in halfway through the season. No. I don't remember too many quarterbacks who did that. If it looks like 2018 Josh Allen, where, it wasn't good statistically, but you saw the highs of it, that's really what you'd be looking for year 1.
Right.
But in this circumstance, you do have to temper expectations. Had they drafted Bo Nix, we'd be saying, this guy better play. I mean, he better be out there pretty fast.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like a grown man.
Very, very true. Same as Penix.
When the guy is near, it's weird to say for me, but he's near half my age, which has not happened to me too often before in my career covering. Especially, how funny is it with you and I, where when we're talking with Kirk, we're like, hey, remember those Baltimore Orioles with Cal Ripken? He'd be like, yeah, that was pretty great. Albert Bell and Harold Baines. And you're like, yeah, that's right. He's a big baseball guy growing up just like us.
Yep.
And now, if you said that to J.J. McCarthy, you'd be like,
right.
what the heck are you old people talking about?
Yeah.
Like, with Kirk last year. Oh, yeah, Creed. I always grew up listening to it. Like, oh, yeah, Creed, whatever. This guy, what is it?
What has this been?
I don't even know what music he listens to. So
we'll have to find that out.
Yeah. Well, anyway, first Porch podcast. I hope y'all enjoyed it.
Success. The sun even came out,
and it did. And I felt like this was a very pleasant experience, except for me fighting the allergens that are just annihilating every person who has allergies in the world. But other than that, it was great. I'm really glad you could come over.
Glad to be invited. And I do think there's a sponsorship opportunity there for you with some sort of allergy.
Oh, like Claritin or something. Yeah,
I mean,
shoot me a note, Claritin.
Right?
You know, I saw
Zyrtec,
that Dr. Pepper has emerged. It's like climbing the soda rankings. And for some reason, they still have not sponsored this podcast. Doesn't make any sense.
All I can say is no. Just got to keep asking.
I got to keep asking. But I think single-handedly this show has pushed up, has elevated. The way that Jefferson is going to elevate Sam Darnold is like me with Diet Dr. Pepper. So
can't rule it out. Who says no?
Who can prove otherwise? Thanks so much, Dave Campbell, Associated Press. And I am going to be away for a few days on the podcast, so I hope you enjoyed this one. And
watch
we
it twice.
Will catch y'all very soon. To go back and just catch all the hot takes you dropped here. That's not your thing. It's supposed to be my thing.
There was a couple.
I appreciate it, Dave.
Yeah. Peace.
Football.